that's all I have for our fiscal year 21 review. So I'd like to jump into our fiscal year 22 general fund revenue budget. So again, these are just the ongoing revenues that will support our ongoing expenses. And I wanted to just show you where we were fiscal year 18 through 22. You can see in fiscal year 18, our actual was 8.8, 19, 9.3, fiscal year 20 was 10.2. This year's budget was a little conservative, which made sense with COVID, was 9.6, and we're going to end the year at about 10.8. This year's total revenue budget, I have at 10.3. That's also pretty conservative. You can see our sales tax, I'm projecting will be at $7,999,000, and for fiscal year 22, I'm recommending a 10% increase over the current budget year. So that's actually below actuals, but it's still quite a big budget increase from $6.4 million to $7.1 million, or $647,000 increase. Same thing with our state shared sales tax. I'm recommending a 10% increase over current budget, which is $58,500. So all revenues combined 10.3, which is a 7% increase over the current year budget, or a total of $683,000.
Paige?
Yes?
It's Tom. I'm just curious why you're being so conservative on the revenue, because it would seem like the trend is that we should expect our revenue next year to be more than our revenue was this year.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Matthew and I were just having this discussion the other day, and I just naturally tend to lean to the conservative side, but I'm certainly open to discussing increasing it more. I just felt that a 10% budget increase was a pretty significant budget increase. I do think sales tax will come in higher, but if we do bring in more, it just helps our ending fund balance. So at this revenue level, it can still sustain our ongoing expenses. But I am open to that because it is a pretty conservative budget projection. I mean, we could even go up as high as 15% and be fine. But that is, I just felt that a 10% budget increase was a pretty big leap for 1 year.
One of the unknowns in this budget is we have most likely seen more sales tax revenues from our grocery stores because of the fact that people are not eating out. I mean, it's been a tremendous shift in how people are spending their food budgets. And as that shifts back to something more normal, there's only so many restaurants that we have in town. So what portion of that shift we'll pick up maybe through our restaurant business is, it's really, you just have no idea. So I think the conservative approach that she's taking is a good idea. The key to this budget is really the expenditure side, because the expenditure side is limited. If we don't budget it if we don't budget to spend money, then we can't spend it even if we have it. And since we have a very large amount of reserves, we can easily budget to spend more than what we think we may bring in and use some of those reserves to fund that. So I think the revenue side is conservative, but I think it's a good approach.
Other questions on this? Councilman Rossosi, I feel like you had some other thoughts on that. What any other thoughts, comments on that?
No, it was mostly curiosity. I think I assume at the end of the day, we're going to wind up not expecting to spend $10.3 million, and so the fact that we could budget for more revenue really is probably a moot point anyway. I would guess that how much we budget, if budgeting more than 10.3 million in revenue only probably helps us if we're planning on spending a ton of money on city center next year. So I'm guessing it doesn't really impact what our expense budget would look like probably anyway.
What our expense budget has historically looked like through the use of various capital contingencies and other contingencies is we tend to have our expenditure budget very close to what is our expenditure limitation, which is a state law that limits how much we can spend as a city based upon prior expenditures and with the futures, with some future adjustments. So we're going to end up with a budget that has an operating budget that will be accurate, but then we'll build in various contingencies and capital expenses that are discretionary so that we have the ability to spend the money if we decide to spend it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you both. If there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And Matthew's going to cover the general fund big ticket item.
Thank you, Paige. Mayor and Council, we tried to lay out the big increases for you. On the next slide, you'll see the big decreases. So just to go through several of these. So as you'll see, the first one, we're planning for a total of 3.3% raise this year. That is 1.5% COLA, 1.5% merit. In comparison, a lot of cities around the valley are doing 5%, some are even doing 7%. That being said, as I've told our staff, I don't think that's sustainable long term. Cities have a bad habit of doing that, and then when the recession hits, they're in trouble, end up having to lay off people. I would rather be conservative. I'm not a fan of going too high on that. To be honest, I'm accustomed to 2%. I think 3% is fairly generous as far as how I look at finances go. But again, it would be a 1.5 merit, 1.5 COLA. Obviously, not all employees will get the 1.5% merit. That depends on their evaluations. We did see a 10% health insurance cost increase this year for $43,000. So for last year, there was a 7% raise, which you may remember. And last year, employee deductibles went up also. We chose not to do that this year. When I say we, I mean the insurance pool did, not to put that on the employees. However, what the employees pay to their check is going up as well. However, the city is taking most of that at $43,000. It's been an expensive year for insurance, as you might imagine. And we will look at other options in the future. We'll talk about that further because we have more questions on that issue. As you know as well, we have several department heads. We have 3 department heads retiring this fiscal year. So we have to plan for that, for their payouts, for accrued vacation time, et cetera. Also, we have to plan for transitional time for the new people to come in to spend some time with them before we lose all those senior department heads. So that is the cost there you see in that $72,000. The 11 grand was for staff salary increases. That's outside of the 3%. That's where positions change. Several positions change as we divided up duties. As some positions were eliminated, some duties were divided between different people. So that's why you see some of those raises. I can go into that more if you have further questions on that. You may remember the on-call item from the March Council agenda. Public Works starting July 1 will be working standby time or on-call time, whatever you prefer to call it. That's the total estimate for that for 1 year is $4,400. The Goodyear fire increase, again, that's a preliminary number. They don't actually give us that number till, when is it paid, July or August?
It's July.
July.
But they did let me know last week they don't see this number changing hardly at all. So hopefully it stays.
Okay. Thank you, Paige. A few other things you see, obviously, the biggest one is police services. As you know, we're going with Avondale, and that's a large change. That's a $597,000 difference from this year to next year. So again, that's the large majority of it. Police equipment, 15 grand. And again, the cameras are $80,000 a year. So that's another one. $12,000 a year for engineering and planning restructure. I'll get into that more when we get into those individual departments, what that will look like. And that's a grand total of $933,000 in increase on the general fund this year. But again, 2/3 of that is the police transition. That's a lot of information on one slide. Any questions on the general fund big ticket items? Thank you. Next slide, please, Paige. On this one, you will see the reductions. In my opinion, we've had a lot of overtime in the past, so we've tightened up that overtime policy a lot, where overtime now has to be approved by the department head and by the city manager. Obviously, there will be times when it has to be used. So just when the microburst came through, there's times we can't avoid overtime, but a lot of times we can. So we expect to see a $12,000 savings on that over the fiscal year. You may remember last year we eliminated the rec office manager position and we divided those duties among several people. We also eliminated the part-time rec program assistant. Those two savings equate to $89,000. We made some changes to the recreation services budget. That's $3,300. We reduced lifeguard hours. That's $31,000. You may remember from a recent email, we've made some changes. We're eliminating the assistant city manager position, dividing those duties among several different people. That will make a $77,000 savings just for that one item. I'll go into more detail why it's not more in the city manager's budget. There's also the $12,000 for the ITHR finance page. We talked about that one on those departments, and $20,000 in general fund operation reductions. We cut expenses wherever we could on this budget and tried to make spending as close as we possibly could. There were a lot of departments where they had items that were budgeted, for example, $2,000 a year when they only spent $800. And if you spent $800 for the last several years, it shouldn't be budgeted at $2,000. So we tried to go through these departments wherever we could and make changes. But again, most of those savings we made were used by other things. So those general fund reductions made a total of $266,000 for next fiscal year. Any questions on any of those items? Next slide, please. This, of course, is the city manager's budget. So one thing to explain on the salaries, you may wonder why the salaries have only changed $3,000 when we no longer have an ACM. There's two main reasons for that. One of them, I moved the assistant to council and city manager from the clerk's department to the city manager's department. Obviously, that employee still works here, not a question. But to me, it made more sense for that person or that position to be under the city manager's department than the clerk's department. So you'll see, so that, of course, is an increase in the city manager's department, but it's a decrease on the clerk's department. It's just moving money from one department to another. Also, for our management assistant position, in the past, it only been budgeted for 10 hours a week, and that's just not realistic. That position really works about 25. And we've tracked that and looked back, and it is generally 25 hours. So we did make that change to make it accurate. So that's why you only see a $3,000 decrease is those two items. If that makes sense. And again, we split up the ACM duties between several different staff members. That's the main changes there. Again, health insurance costs did go up, as you'll see below. You'll see a $20,000 increase there. There's also the CDBG grant funds. That's $15,000. That's for the assistance that's currently available. Not many people are using that right now, but it's there if we need it. And again, we have the COVID assistance grants there. If you guys decide to extend that further, the money's there if we want to do that. Any questions on the city manager's budget? Thank you. Next slide, please, Paige. And this one is the council budget. So of course, this is yours. You will see a decrease here of $8,000 or 20%. Several different things on different line items. The biggest one, of course, is dues and membership. We reduced that just based on actuals. Again, we tried to do this for all city departments. We reduced it to actual expenditures where we could. So you'll see that one alone was $1,700. There's another one on banquets and meals that was $3,000, again, based on actuals. So there's a few things there. There were some increases as well. Some of them also we combined. You'll see the miscellaneous account. Every department had a miscellaneous account. I'm not a fan of a miscellaneous account, neither is Paige, in my opinion. That's too easy. So we tried to divide miscellaneous expenditures between actual line items they should fall under, rather than have a miscellaneous account. To me, a miscellaneous account is flush fund. I'm not a fan personally. So you'll see that change in every department.
Is it a possibility if they draft a quarterback?
I can barely hear somebody.
Matthew, it's Ron. I got a quick question for you. On the previous slide, under lodging and meals, you had 0. We don't want to make any type of budgetary line item for that?
Give me 1 second, sir. We combined that line item, sir, with employee travel. We had several different accounts for travel, And that's why we divided those into one, because to us, it didn't make sense to divide it up that way. So there's still money there. We just combined several accounts into one. That's all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Other questions as far as the council budget goes? Okay. There's no other questions on this one. We'll go to the next slide. And Paige, we're back to you.
Thanks, Matthew. This is the city clerk budget, and Matthew just went over the reason for the decrease in this department was moving that position over to the city manager department. So that's what these big decreases are for. And just like all the other departments, there are some increases and decreases. We merged a few things, like merged employee travel or lodging and meals with employee travel. We added, there was a cell phone for the city clerk and deputy city clerk, so that was a new expense, which is good for discovery purposes, that people aren't using their personal cell phones. There wasn't anything too significant other than moving that position out of this department. Are there any questions?
And again, Mayor and Council, as we get the departments, the department heads are on the phone if you have, are on the line, if you have any specific questions on their budgets.
Okay, we'll move on to, sorry, city clerk had 2 pages actually. So here's the rest of the city clerk's budget. One thing we did do is, like Matthew mentioned, we got rid of the miscellaneous item here, and we created an election expenses. So it shows a new budget amount of $4,300, but it was just taken from these other election lines. Trying to just clean up the line item. So yeah, it's just a lot easier to track. Okay, next we have the city attorney. Kept that budget flat at $150,000. We typically don't spend that much, but we do like to have the budget capacity in case there is the need for more legal advice. Budget and finance. The biggest thing we did in budget and finance is, in the past, IT services have been under the budget and finance department. And this year we decided to create an IT or information technology department and split that out. So we're able to easily track what we're spending on IT. I'll still be over that department essentially. There won't be an increase because we broke this out. But I think it'll be good for everybody to see how much we're actually spending on IT and apart from finance. One big change we had is one of the finance staff reduced their hours to 30 hours per week. So the FTE is 0.75. So we used a portion of that salary to fund half a portion of an IT position. And then we also used from the HR budget, she had a full-time HR assistant budgeted. We used the rest of that to pay for our IT/HR specialist. We'll be able to see more when I get to the IT budget. Our auditors, we do contract out our annual financial audit. It's in the contract. We do have a $500 increase this year. And I also we had our GFOA CAFR award budgeted in miscellaneous. I moved it to auditors because that really is part of our audit. We do have $12,000 budgeted for our contract sales tax auditor. We have reached out to him to start an audit just based on what happened with our construction sales tax. I think it's a good idea to keep it in for next year as well, because that could flow into next year. The Arizona Department of Revenue admin fees, that's in state statute, so we have to pay that. I'm estimating it'll be around 17,000, but I haven't received the final number yet. I divided up training and education and allocated 2,000 to travel and 1,500 to training and education. And you can see all these other line items were moved to the IT budget. We've had a cell phone in this department before, but it was just charged to miscellaneous. So I took it out of miscellaneous and actually created a line item for cellular phones who are accurately tracking it. The biggest increase finance had this year is in our bank charges. It wasn't that we had a better deal this current year, we just had a credit. And so our actual annual cost is about $4,500. And are there any questions on the budget and finance? So our information technology budget, like I mentioned, it's being split funded between IT and HR. There are some increases in the operating for IT. This is just based on need. We do need some more computers this year. And we also are going to see an increase for internet services. And if you remember, there was an agreement where we had fiber ran to City Hall and the library. Once we turn that fiber on, it'll be an additional $3,600. But we should see an increase in our speed, which will be good when everybody starts going back to the office next week. And then miscellaneous software and other. This is actual software we're using right now. On top of our IT consultant is recommending that we purchase, it's like a password tracking software, which is good for IT security. Also software so computers can be accessed remotely. Those seem to be reasonable requests to me. We are having our IT evaluated right now. So at our next meeting, there could be a change to our IT based on that evaluation, but this is currently what we're looking at. And then our city website, it had been budgeted in community services. And so we took that out of community services and put it in the IT budget because that's really more of an IT function.
Excuse me, Paige.
Yes?
It's Ron. A question about the Cox. So I use Cox at my business and we get about 1 terabyte. So a very fast level of service for about $360 a month. So I think we could probably negotiate with Cox and get a significantly better deal than what we're dealing there. And that should just be simple. Those are kind of going rates.
Okay, I will reach out to them and look into that further. Thank you for letting me know that.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Next we have the HR budget. The biggest change here would be that part of that position that I talked about that was moved to IT. And then we also just looked at the actuals, and that's what a lot of these reductions are for. We just tightened it up, and not an actual reduction to what HR was spending, but a reduction to actuals. And other than moving that position out, there wasn't anything significant with HR. If there's no questions on that, I will send it back to Matthew.
Thank you, Paige. Mayor and Council, as you might imagine, the Public Works budget is one of our largest budgets, just by department, by sheer employees. As you'll see, one increase there, of course, is wages, which went up $34,000. Again, we are planning for 3%. Public Works has quite a few employees. Also, as well, one of the ACM duties I divided up was the emergency management duties. And Kyle, which is number 2 our Public Works, he is now handling emergency management duties. And a lot of cities, our emergency management falls under Public Works, as they know the infrastructure, they know the utilities. So he took on that assignment a few weeks ago. So that's part of that change as well. Going down through these, you'll see some of these. Same thing on the other combinations as we talked about with travel, dues and subscriptions, and seminar and class registration were all combined into one line item. As you see before, that's why they were 600 and 5,000 before and zero. But we also based that off actual expenditures. There's several pages on public works, so bear with me to go through these. Next page, please. Thank you, Paige. A big one you'll see on this one is gas and oil. It's a $9,000 increase. As you all know, anybody that's buying gas knows that gas has went up a lot since November. I know I feel that a lot every time I fill my truck up. I'm sure you guys do as well. So we have to plan for that for city vehicles as well for that fuel cost increase. Again, we're planning for $9,000 for that. The others are fairly close. Any questions on this slide? There's 4 public works slides. Okay. Next slide, please, Paige. As you'll see, many of these are similar. Some of these we combined as well. You'll see City Hall cleaning that was combined into City Hall general maintenance. Again, as Paige said, we try to simplify line items whenever we could. Another one you'll see is village park utilities and maintenance went up from $7,000 to $15,000. 4,000 of that is for the field maintenance for Jackie Robinson. So that is a good chunk of that increase. But some items went down as well. A big one you see here is emergency maintenance and repairs. We're at $25,000, went down to $5,000. Because there are other line items in other departments, so that's why we did it that way. Because we try to divide out what's a big expense and what's not, what classifies an emergency expense, what does not, etc. So that's why you see the big change on that one. Next page, please. Big increase there is watering in the right of ways. As you see, it went up from $185,000 to $200,000. It was a hot summer, trying to keep everything alive. But of course, you may remember last year it was 100 degrees in March. Knock on wood, we're not going to break 100 degrees this year till May. So maybe our water will actually go down, but of course we have to plan for it to be as hot as it was last year. And if so, that's why we're at $200,000 versus $185,000. Just trying to keep things looking decent. It's harder when it's $115,000 for 45 days.
Hey, Matthew.
Yes, ma'am.
It's Ann Donahue. So of course, you know what I'm looking at, the holiday lights and decorations. I know I talked to Richard last year and then again this year. Is this the appropriate time to talk about that or no?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, because we talked about, you know, getting the lights wrapped around the trees. Anyway, just to improve what's happened the last couple of years. And I think you said yesterday, it could be to the tune of $25,000 to $30,000. And then it would stay and we could use it for different holidays and so forth. So just wonder if you might look at that in that category.
We could certainly look at that as far as changing that one item if that's something the council would like to see. I would tell you, a lot of councils don't realize that how much commercial grade Christmas lights cost. They're not cheap. They're expensive. They really are. For example, pole decorations. A good size pole decoration can easily run you $800 a piece. They're expensive. Yeah. The large Christmas presents you see outside malls when they're the 5 and 6 foot tall Christmas presents, that setup is $15,000 to $20,000. Commercial Christmas lights are very expensive, but we could look at doing this. I know this is something the Councilman Donahue has discussed before. I've also discussed with Richard with upgrading our infrastructure around the palm trees downtown. They need new water lines. They need new conduit. All that infrastructure needs to be replaced. It's my understanding at one time those palm trees all had lights around them, but as the trees grew over the years, it broke the wires as it would. But we would need to replace some of the infrastructure as well. But we could certainly look at increasing this to $25,000 or $30,000 if that's something you guys would like to do.
Well, and I think Richard had talked to some of the vendors, and because my concern is even at Christmas, those trees were wrapped with lights, but they were never on. I had numerous people say to me, like, you know, in the past, years past, we had beautiful displays, and people are like, what are they up there for? Why aren't they turning them on? Blah, blah, blah. So I know I've worked with Richard, so it certainly was more than 7,500. So.
And this is Tom. I would just echo your request there. I know our our downtown displays have looked a heck of a lot better in the past than they did this year. So I think I would support your suggestion to spend a little more money there.
Okay.
Mayor Paul.
Go ahead,
Can you
Mr.
guys hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. I'd like to know what it costs to wrap those trees and have those lights on every day of the year. We used to have one a whole lot more, and it's really a nice feature for the downtown area to set it off. So it's not quite as big as Glendale Glitters, but it is still a nice feature. So I'd like to know what that expense is, and it's not too bad. I would really be in favor of it.
Okay.
We
Well,
can call it marketing. We can call it marketing dollars because we need people to come in and build here and developers. So use the marketing money. If there's such.
It does help. I think we can have Richard work on this and have a harder number for the next council meeting. I'm sorry. I think somebody was just trying to speak.
Matthew, it's Ron. I had a question on the previous slide with trees and the work on trees. I know we've lost a ton of trees and replacement, and we're going to have another hot summer. Do we think matching the same number from last year works with that, with everything that's happened and what we need to replace?
Will you go back one slide page? Richard, are you on the line with us? And Terry, if you can clear so we can speak.
Matthew, I'm here. Let me see.
We budgeted 165 last year, for 165 again this year.
How you doing? Good evening, Mayor, Council. Yeah, so to touch on a couple of the questions asked. So first off, the trees, we kind of stayed the same. Even though we did lose trees, we are in the process right now of replanting some trees little by little as the weeks go on. And then the maintenance on these trees are getting a lot more older. As you can see throughout the city, you know, a lot of our trees are, you know, they got dead limbs, which we're going to have to get removed, have West Coast, you know, the vendor come in and remove those and then try and replace those trees. And again, a lot of the trees that are already in the city are fairly old. You know, they're going from 30 to 40 to 60 feet. So it's going to cost to, you know, get those trimmed up and have the debris removed. And what the equipment that's required, I mean, we're looking at 90-foot booms. So that's why we kept it at the same mark there. And go ahead.
My question. Sorry, Richard, I didn't mean to cut you off, but my question is, we probably need an increase there. As I drive around the park, we have a lot of old growth trees that are dying and in bad shape, and we're going to have to replace a lot or spend money to maintain. So I just wonder if that's an opportunity for us to have a little bit of a larger budget item to be able to make sure we are able to keep the park the way we need to.
Matthew, you know what? That's great. That's great to hear from you, because yeah, it is. We, you know, as we're trying to keep it, you know, budget nice and tight and kind of work with what we have. I believe, you know, an increase is something that we can look into because when we replant these trees, you know, we're looking at 24-inch box trees, and then, you know, if you want to plant the same size tree, you're looking into, you know, the 600 to 800. So it's definitely something we can look into.
It would be a good idea to go through and at least by certain areas of the park, of the old part of the city, and do an assessment of how many trees need to be, you know, that need significant maintenance. A lot of the pine trees you see that are in bad shape have some sort of a bark beetle type disease that we really can't do anything about. And so a lot of those trees, they're either they are dead or they will be dead in the next year or so. So I think if we did an assessment so we understood what is the size of this problem and how much money do we really need to budget so that we can go in and start getting the trees taken out and get them replaced.
Okay.
Matthew, if I may.
Councilman Romack.
Oh, Tom, okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to follow up with what Ron had to say. I would agree that Richard, this is kind of who we are. As far as the trees go, either the palm trees or the orange trees are kind of a signature item. You can look at our city logo, and it's a prominent part of it. I would strongly recommend that we assess the trees. But the other side of it, or another aspect of this, is if you look at the trees directly north of Reds, there's about half a dozen to 10 orange trees, and virtually all of those need to be replaced. Now, I know that's not us, that's the hotel or the wigwam in general that owns those, but I think that it's reasonable for us to have a level of expectation from the hotel that they maintain a certain level of quality that they want to have involved in their hotel. And I just really think that they need to deal with that. Another thing about the trees in general and the Christmas lights, Richard, is we put in that power about 20 years ago to all the first couple of cul-de-sacs or centerpieces, and that was done actually kind of outside of the rules of the city. And so you need to figure out who's writing the rules and who gets to deal with it and who can make the rules and who can bend the rules. But for right now, we got the power there, but it's getting pretty old, and I imagine it's getting pretty tired. Thank you.
Yes, sir, it is. To that point, with the electricity in the center of town, it doesn't work with turf and electrical that's a few feet off the ground. The electrical should have been raised up a little higher to where it doesn't get consistently wet through irrigation, but yet at a reasonable height to where staff for special events are still able to use the electricity. So that's something that we definitely are looking into, and to be a capital improvement project.
Sure.
And then to the point with the Christmas lights, I did speak with the rep today. I did request kind of some numbers from our last meeting to wrap the palm trees again down in the downtown area. I asked him to do every other tree, because if we did every tree, especially in front of the shops, not to say that we could not, but to do every tree in front of the restaurants, plus every 6 trees east, west, and south, the number's gonna go up there into the $30,000-$40,000 range. So right now, again, I requested some numbers so that way we can get a good idea. And again, this lighting company would be essentially a sole source vendor through Lightorama, and they're the only one registered for these RGB lights to be installed in the state of Arizona. So that's a plus for us, and the product seems to be very good. You can program, and to Ann's point, we can use them throughout the year for all types of events. You can get very creative with them. It's just the initial cost and the infrastructure for those. But hopefully by the next meeting, we'll have those numbers, a general idea of what it's going to cost.
Richard, if you could get us a hard number on the Christmas lights, I know you're working on that already. If you could get us a hard number on that, and as far as the tree preservation as well, and we can revisit this one, or these two, at the next budget meeting.
Okay, and just kind of a question for the council. Would you, with trees going back in, obviously a 24-inch or 36-inch box tree is more inexpensive, and we can plant more. Would you guys like to see anything bigger than that being replanted?
It would probably be a good idea, Richard, to get some costs so we have some understanding of the difference between a 24 and a 36 and a 48, and what's the difference in the heights of those trees. It may be I know some of the trees that the club / the JDM looked at a variety of trees when one of the storms went through maybe 6 or 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And they were able to find some trees that would grow very quickly, and ended up going with maybe a 36-inch box, that because it was the most cost-effective tree that would become relatively large, within a few years. So
Okay, will do. I'll work on those costs.
Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Paige, next slide, please. Okay, this is the last public works slide. Again, we talked about watering a few minutes ago. A few other small changes. One you'll see there is the recycling hazardous waste event. We didn't do that this year. If that's something you guys would like to go back now, Richard, will you speak to that issue? We're partnering with Goodyear on that, or we were partnering with Goodyear on that.
Yeah, so in the past, I think Lynn Webb, our older code enforcement, she would have us on staff to do that. But I guess some of the problems as I got transitioned into that with the hazardous, and especially with COVID, they didn't, they canceled the event. But then Avondale, Goodyear, Tolleson, they went ahead and did their own hazardous waste. And if we were to do that on our own, it would cost us a lot more. It would cost us a lot more than we have budgeted from, I believe it's $9,000 in there, $9,000. It would start to cost us more in the $15,000 range if we were to have them, set up for our residents to come here and drop their hazardous waste, or have them go to the actual drop site to where they do get rid of all these hazardous waste materials. So cost-wise, it'd be a lot more for us to do that in-house than what we used to do, partnering up with our partner cities there. And then tracking our residents is a big issue. You have in the park, and then you have a lot of Litchfield residents who live outside of the park. So that's where it becomes hard with tracking.
That's what I was going to say, was Richard's point. It is very hard to track. I've done these events in other communities, and it's great if it's just your citizens. However, say, for example, we ask for ID. Well, it's going to show zip code. That doesn't mean they live in city limits. And also, people bring you things that are expensive to get rid of. And I've even seen commercial companies drop off truckloads full of hazardous materials, and then the city has to pay for it. If this is something the council feels that we should do in the community, we certainly can. But again, there's definitely some risk there. But I've never been here for one of these events before in the past. Again, the one I would have been here for was canceled because of COVID. If there's a strong feeling that we'd like to put this back, we certainly can. But I don't know if the risk outweigh the benefits.
Matthew.
Yes, sir.
I've always kind of struggled with this event. Somebody drops off a couple of gallon cans that are a quarter empty of latex paint, and our average cost is a couple of $100 a can. It's kind of the same situation you were talking about in reverse, where they drop off a ton of hazardous waste. We have people drop off a very nominal amount of non-hazardous waste, and the cost is still significant. I've always struggled with this program.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm not a fan personally either. Me and Sonny have discussed with Waste Management as well. They're willing to give people bags to pick up some hazardous materials, like a certain kind of bag to drop off at your home, but it would be very small amounts, like what the Vice Mayor is speaking. It wouldn't be big items at all. Waste Management is willing to do that, but people would have to call and get the bags. They'd have to go to jump through a few hoops to do it. But again, I would recommend we not do this unless it's something you guys really feel we should do.
Matthew, I have a quick question. In the past, Goodyear certainly allowed us to bring things. They never asked about a zip code. So are they no longer doing that? I remember driving to Goodyear a number of times with things.
We generally paid for that, Councilman Donahue. The city paid Goodyear for allowing our
Okay.
residents to go up and use that drop off.
Okay. And here's a question. Can you charge the residents? I mean, like I would pay to get rid of my paint. So and not here, but in order to partner with Goodyear, can you charge the residents or the residents pay to do it? I don't know.
I think we could have a fee schedule where we charge per item. I would worry though that you'd have to charge so much that it wouldn't work, that they wouldn't use it.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be possible to hold some sort of a registration so we could give people maybe a registration card so we controlled who is going to go use the Avondale or Goodyear event?
That's an interesting idea. I think that'd be a good way of doing that. We have people register in advance and they have to give that ticket, however you want to say it, when they go to take the items to Goodyear. And that way too, we can know who's in the city and who's not. That would be a good way to control that. And then we can.
Matthew? Years ago, we would also have staff on site verifying addresses for the city just because of the expense and cost.
Really? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it
we would
be-
actually turn them away if they weren't a Litchfield Park resident.
You would have to.
Yeah.
And I asked that because I literally would save my things then all year and wait to see the post about doing it. And I'm realizing that clearly I haven't gone in the last couple of years, but I do think a number of residents would be willing to pay for that, or like the mayor said, register. So I think it's worth looking into if we can partner with somebody. I don't know about holding one ourselves, and I don't know what the expense is, but I pay a good amount of money to get rid of stuff in my garage.
Well,
I think you would find, and it costs you more to get rid of it than it costs to buy it.
No, but the problem is you can't throw it away, right? So what do you do with it?
Well, if it's latex paint, you just let it harden up and then toss it.
Yeah. Is it also electronic things as well? Because they did that before as well.
It has been in the past.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, which is, old VCRs, that stuff you don't want to throw in the trash. So besides paint, I had a bucket full. Anyway.
I'll touch base with waste management and find out how much of a problem this is. In previous cities, I've had landfills as a city department, and they have a huge problem with this, with people sneaking stuff in trash cans that shouldn't get in there, tires, paint cans, etc. So let me ask them and see if this is a major issue for waste management for us, if it's not, and we can certainly add this to our list for next time. Okay.
All right.
Any other questions on public works? Oh, the last one I would say is miscellaneous. As you'll see, same thing here. We divided this line item among several departments or several line items. As I said, we don't like miscellaneous line items. So that was divided several areas. Any other questions on public works? Okay. Thank you again, Richard. Next slide, please, Paige. Moving on to building safety. Mayor and Council, as you will remember, Mary is going to be retired next March, our building official. So we're preparing for that. Part of that is transition, and part of that is as we hire a new employee to fill that spot. So that's part of the cost you'll see there. So a few of the things you'll see is that, one, plans examiner, we're planning on having those bills go to the contractors directly rather than us paying for that. There is some increase there for commercial inspections. Same thing as with travel accounts here as we do with other departments. We combine these, as you'll see. Other questions on building safety or any at all? Next slide.
If I may.
Yes, sir.
John Romack. Where's code enforcement come into your budget?
That's the next department coming up, sir.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And at this point, I'm going back to Paige. Paige, code enforcement, please.
Thanks, Matthew. Code enforcement, the biggest change that we had here is this current year we budgeted for that position to be a full-time 40-hour position. When the position was actually filled, it was only at 30 hours, and I believe that was working well. And so we went ahead and reduced the budget to 30 hours per week. And it's a very lean budget. So we reduced several line items based on actuals. And so code enforcement has a decrease of $29,585. Councilman Romack, did you have any other questions about code enforcement?
No, I just wanted to be sure that it was in the budget, and I didn't see it on the last page, last slide. Thank you.
And I would just make a comment in terms of this department is a small department, but it's a very important department in terms of the whether our residents generally are happy or not happy. When we have issues with houses not being kept up to a reasonable standard, it causes problems in our neighborhoods that go way beyond just the one house. So I would encourage, I know we're in a process of replacing our code enforcement officer, and that this area needs to be a priority. So we want to make sure we get a good person in there, and if we have to increase the budget back to a full-time person, then I think that you should consider doing that.
I actually would second that, because I think especially with as many projects as we have upcoming, that we should at least budget for full time. And if we're actually under, then we're under. But I think we should at least be looking forward.
I would agree with what the mayor had to say. Thank you.
We can certainly make that change and bring that one back as well the next meeting.
Definitely. Thank you. And I'm going to, I believe, yes, send this back to Matthew.
Thank you, Paige. Planning services. Again, another retirement here, as you guys may remember. Our current planning director is retiring actually this October. So we've talked to her about that. So there are some costs there as that employee retires. And there will also be some transition time. We want to hire new people to have enough time with the person going out of that position where we don't lose all that knowledge. That's a huge loss to the city. When you lose a person that's been here for a long time, you lose all that knowledge with them when they walk out the door. So we want to give the new person some time to spend with them where we can try to pull as much information out of her head as we possibly can in the time that we have her here. So we are planning for that transition. We will be hiring for this job soon. One change I would tell you on this that we're looking to do, in many communities, you have a community development director, which is also the city engineer is the community development director. And building, planning, code enforcement all fall under this one department. I think that would make sense to do the same thing here. When we get the engineer side, you'll see that Woody's recommended that we have a full-time city engineer on staff. I can talk about that more on that slide. But I would recommend we make that change as these positions retire out and we refill them, that we change it so that the city engineer, of course, is an engineer, but is also the community development director. And again, so that planning, building, code enforcement would all fall under one department head versus three. Obviously, our current staff that is still here would remain department heads as long as they're here with us, not a question. And I have spoken to them about making this transition as well. But again, a lot of communities do this. I think it makes sense for us. I welcome any questions if there are any on that transition, and then I can go into more of this.
I would just make a comment that this changing the way that this structure is in our city once everyone has gone through the retirement process, I think is a very good idea, and that it will promote a much more efficient management structure. So I recommend, my recommendation is you can continue on that path.
Thank you, sir. The main change there in the cost between this year and next year, again, is the retirement. It's the retirement, the transition, and a new employee. That position will change more, where it'll be more of a planning assistant than it will be what we have a planning administrator now. So there is a change there as far as that goes. I have talked to our contracted planner, of course, which is Jason, as you guys know, and he's planning to stay on with us and still work with us through this change. So we have had that discussion. A few other changes that you see, again, that's the big one. Again, we combine travel with this, same thing with all other city departments. City center planning, we took out of this one because of it being a city center budget versus this one. Any other questions on planning budget or the change? Okay. If there's no other questions, next slide, please, Paige. Engineering services. I've already told you some of this change. Again, our current city engineer will be retiring about Christmas time this year. He's asked for some transition time there as well between our current city engineer and the new engineer, who either he or she may be. So we are planning for that. So I did have this discussion with him about as far as, does it make sense to have a full-time engineer on staff? And when you look at what we currently pay our current contracted engineers, it does, it makes sense. It would be, it's cheaper on, depending on what they're doing, to have a city engineer on staff. But of course, that depends how much work can we put on the person, as you know, is what it really comes down to. We spend a lot of money right now with engineering firms. We just do, because we're doing so much design work in city center alone. One thing you have to be aware of these positions, though, is until city center is built out, as you know, eventually the city center, or the city as a whole, will be built out between city center and between the JDM property across the street. So I would say for the next 5 years, you need a city engineer and a building official and a planning assistant. You need all these positions, but one day you may not. That being said, though, 5 years is a long time from now, and staff's changed too over time. But I thought that was important to point that out there. So again, I think this is a good decision. I think it's something we need. I think we'll definitely use them, especially with city center being built, having this person on staff. That being said, City Hall is going to be a little crowded this fall as we do these transitions. With our current employees here and our new ones coming in, we're going to have people on top of people. But anyway, any questions as far as the engineering budget goes? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you. Tom, talk to us about Clear Creek Associates. When are they going to get out of our pocket?
I don't know anything more about when they're going to get out of our pocket than you do. The plume is not anywhere near cleaned up. It may be that we could reduce the level of surveillance that Clear Creek is doing, and thereby cut that budget. But it would be I think it's a good expense to at least have some level of supervision and scrutiny by an independent engineer, because of the history that we've had with this company in terms of it not fulfilling its obligations. So
I would agree. It just seems like we've been doing this now for as long as you and I have been around.
Yeah, 16 years.
It's got to kind of work itself out.
Yeah, maybe that would be a good thing, a good project for staff to look into, to see what we can do to keep some level of surveillance on this project, but maybe cut back the number of hours that we're spending on it, currently, unless we see something happen in the project that makes us need to bring back the level that we're at right now.
Mayor, Paul.
Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yeah. I sent you an email today also on this exact same issue when you get a chance. Maybe a letter can go out to the governor or something.
A letter on this issue?
Yes.
Did you send it to my city email?
I don't know where it went. I copied you and sent to Matthew, you and Matthew both.
All right.
It's based upon Juicy's attempt to get the feds involved in some of this cleanup and ignoring the old Navy base.
Well, the feds are involved already with this plume cleanup. Unfortunately, what they are requiring Unit Dynamics to do doesn't include paying our cost of supervising whether or not they're making progress or not. So, and that was a fight we had with them a long time ago.
We fought for that when we reached this agreement way back, but we couldn't get that thrown in by Crane.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think that we can actually cut this expense back some. I don't know how much, because I'd have to pull out and take a look at exactly what they're doing again. But I suspect that the budget could be cut maybe by 50%, because they're making progress, although very, very slowly. And I don't think it's necessary that the things that we had significant concerns with, in terms of the plume getting near our lake and the plume getting across Dysart Road, those things have pulled back, so that the trend would have to change significantly before we would see that same sort of threat to our city. So it could easily be that we could take Clear Creek and cut back what they're doing. We just need to take the time to go through and look at it again and see what a new plan could be.
Mayor, we used to get monthly reports also. I think they've slowed down somewhat.
We still get those, sir.
Are they getting to our level, or am I just blanking out on them?
No, sir. I received them, Woody, as well. If Mayor and Council would like to, I'd be glad to include that in the manager's report, so you can see them as well.
Yeah, we used to get the maps. Yeah, the maps and everything, and I found those extremely interesting and important to see what the testing was, or as it was progressing toward the lake or away from the lake, and how it was going. So I would like to get those back in our packets, at least get that to us somehow.
I'm glad to, sir.
Yeah, normally they used to be in our council packets.
It's part of the staff report.
Right.
I'll put them back in.
Yeah, and then, I think we want to take a look at what they're doing and see if we can maybe cut it down a little bit. So where it's not a monthly activity. We had cut, I don't know if you remember, but we do a lot of our own testing, and we cut that back also. So we can take a look at all those different cost items and see what we might be able to make further reductions in.
We'll be glad to look into that one. Other questions on engineering? Okay. Next slide, please. Next up, we have the court budget. Several changes here. Me and the mayor recently met with Judge Ring and had some discussions about this. One change you'll see is currently, as you may know, we have one court clerk, and of course we have Judge Ring. We were also budgeted for a part-time court assistant position. However, in my opinion, we didn't need it. We didn't need that position. So we talked with Judge Ring about this and our court clerk, and we have eliminated that position for next year. Also, as part of that change, we did make our court clerk is salaried as well. So I think that was a change that should be done already. In my opinion, department heads and number twos in departments should always be salaried just by the nature of their work. So, but again, that was a change that we made that does make some difference there. Other changes would be, as you'll see, there was a big reduction of these per item. We looked at department spending on this over several years, and a lot of them we had a lot more budgeted for than we actually spent. For example, prosecutor, in previous years we budgeted 35 grand. We only spent 11.5. For a public defender, we budgeted 3,500 in years past. For this year, we budgeted 600 based off previous actuals. So we had this discussion with the judge. He was a little concerned that, be careful how I say this, that court business is going to pick up soon. So that being said, when we took money out of line items in the court budget, we moved it down to a court contingency fund. This is the only department you'll see that has a contingency fund in it, just for that reason, that if we had to move it back to a line item, we could. But again, that way the line items are more based on actual spending, but the money is still there should court business drastically pick up. I think that's important to understand. The money's still in the court budget, but it's under contingency line item versus multiple line items, if that makes sense. Any questions as far as court budget goes? Thank you. Next slide, please, Paige. One of our more expensive slides, for obvious reasons, is our public safety slide. So as you'll see, for this year, we have budgeted $1,638,000 For next year, we're budgeting 2,367,000. Obviously, again, the big change is PD is going from MCSO to Avondale. And you'll see that change from 920 to 1518. Animal control changed $200. Police expenses, that's some equipment for our existing cars, such as the radio. For our current Tahoe we have now, the radio is outdated. Avondale can't use it, so I have to buy a new radio for it. We'll also re-decal it. Same thing with the Crown Vic. Also, the cameras fall in the public safety budget. They're $80,000 a year, $2,500 per camera at 32 cameras, $80,000. Fire went up just a little bit. Posse equipment went down because we won't have that. We won't have posse anymore as part of the change. And again, gas and oil for patrol vehicles. That will be outside of the IGA, but gas and maintenance, that 31.6. And of course, jail fees. This one's pretty simple, but is a big one. Any questions on any of these line items?
I'm curious, you've got jail fees in. Right now, we use the county jail. Are we going to continue to use the county jail with Avondale, or will we switch over to Avondale's jail?
We'll still use Avondale, sir, as long as we can. It depends on how long they have to be in there for. If they're going to be in for a short time, they can stay in Avondale. And I do know that Avondale is cheaper. For those of you that may know, county jails are usually much more expensive the first day than they are the following days for whatever reason. So if anytime we have somebody that has to go into jail, we would want them to stay in Avondale as long as they could versus county fees. But sometimes they will have to go from Avondale to county, depending on how long they're in there. Also, it depends on the nature of the crime.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Other questions on public safety? Thank you. Next slide, please. Recreation services. We put a lot of time this year into recreation budget and trying to make it work as it should. Some of those you'll see. So again, this is revenues. So as you'll see, passes. Last year, 23 grand. This year, we have it at 0. And the reason why is because most of those passes are aquatics revenues. So we move that to aquatics because you have to show where the revenues belong to. Do they belong to sports? Do they belong to aquatics? They belong to aquatics. Same thing there you'll see for the program activity fee. We divided up the activity fee, as you'll see, from 25 grand to 12. And again, because a lot of those fees are for aquatics. So we wanted to make it fair for revenues that are actually aquatics revenues went to aquatics. On the flip side, if they were not true aquatics revenues, they came out of aquatics. So those are your two main changes you'll see on this one, are those two line items. Another one is tennis, as you'll see, is down $4,000 just based on fewer classes, on 8 classes instead of, or 8 people instead of 14, as far as players goes. Other questions on revenues? Page, next slide, please. Recreation services. This one is more for the rec building itself. Most people that come into the rec building, I mean, the rec building, as far as facilities goes, what it has, obviously, it has pool, but that's separate. You have the gym facilities, which a few people use. Not very many use the gym facilities, just to be honest. And of course, you have the court, or you have the tennis courts. So it's important to understand that. So again, this budget 268 down to 257. Part of that change was the wages in the recreation center. So you may remember, again, we eliminated the rec office manager position. That position was divided among several different departments. So we made that change. However, though, we also coded departments correctly. For example, our aquatics director should have been coded. When I say coded, I mean as far as their cost divided according to what department they're worked for. For example, our aquatics director, for many months out of the year, runs aquatics. In the other half of the year, she works special events. So that's important to have that division, to have them coded correctly according to what department they're working for. So we made those changes to code them correctly where they should have been coded all along. So you will see those changes, but again, that's important to understand that. So for some of the savings you would have seen, part of that got taken away by coding correctly. That's the biggest change on this one, is that $11,000, which is in the wages. Questions on this one? Next slide, please. Rec services continued, again, same budget. Nothing here to be too excited about. Again, tennis did go down some because fewer people playing, from 21 grand to 18. So one you'll see there is storage fees. So we're working to get that number cut down. If you may remember, we approved several months ago to sell things through public surplus. We're going to be reducing our storage buildings. We currently pay for 3 storage buildings a month for a lot of things we don't need. So we're going to be selling a lot of those items, and you'll see that storage bill drop. I need to look at that one and see why we still have that at 6,500. So let me make that my note on that myself. 1 second. Thank you. And again, same thing with this one. We cleared out the miscellaneous account here as all other city departments. Questions so far? Next slide, please. Preschool. So our preschool is pretty interesting number-wise. Honestly, your preschool could be an enterprise fund. It really could if you look at the numbers. Revenues-wise for this year, it's budget, or for next year, I'm sorry. It's budgeted to make 128. It's only going to spend 108. We're making $20,000 on preschool, a good sized profit. I mean, it literally is an enterprise fund, or it could be. And it's a cost recovery of 119%. So that's a great job. Our preschool staff does very well. They have brought back our summer program this year, and they've got a lot of kids signed up for it, and they do a great job. So thank you guys for everything you do. Questions on the preschool budget? Revenues or expenditures, either one. Next slide, please. Aquatics. Mayor and Council, we worked a lot on the aquatics budget through multiple meetings to get where it needed to be. For last year, for the revenue side, it was at 64 grand. For this next year, it's at 110. Again, the reason for that is for several things, but one of those is putting revenues toward aquatics that should have went there all along, just in my opinion, as passes, et cetera, because people are really coming there for the pool in the summer, not so much the gym. So we try to put pool revenues there when they should be. So that's why you see that change from 64 to 110. Looking down, some of them others are increased use swim lessons, up 12 grand from 25 to 37. Lugardo's is up $4,000. A big change there you see too is open swim passes. That's $23,000. That's where you see your $46,000 increases between multiple line items. And again, these revenues were in other places in rec. But again, they're really aquatics revenue, so they should go to aquatics. Any questions as far as the revenue side of aquatics? Okay, next slide, please. On the expenditure side of aquatics, again, we put a lot of work into this aquatics budget, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get it to the 50% requirement. As you'll see before, for this current year, it was budgeted for 282. Through a lot of work and changes, that budget is now at 213 for next year. That's a $68,000 decrease, or a 24% decrease. And the pool budget is now over 50% for next year. For the last several years, it's been in the low 30s. For the last year, it was a 32% return. So again, it took a lot of hard work to get it there. A big change you see there obviously is wages. As you see, properly allocating the staff, the director and the assistant to work, because they work on events as well. Some of that was lifeguard hours were reduced as well. We won't have as many lifeguards. We will still, of course, have enough to do the job and keep everyone safe. That's not a question. But we did reduce lifeguard hours where possible. You'll see a few other changes, such as pool equipment. It's a small change. Questions on the aquatics budget so far? Next slide, please, Paige. One change here was the other programs from 1,000 to 3,000. That's a $2,000 increase. The others are mostly the same. Again, because of these changes, the pool budget is now at 52%. And again, we put a lot of work into that to get it where it needs to be. So we're very happy to see that change, to see the aquatics budget now at 52% of cost. Questions on that?
Just a quick comment. I know from the various times that we've talked about the aquatics and the whole rec services area, I know how much time that you and staff has put on trying to improve the revenue and reduce the costs so that we could get this department back into control over the last several years for a variety of reasons, many of which were outside the city's control. This department got way out of whack again, where we were spending significantly more than what the council had wanted to spend on this area. And it seemed like a problem that couldn't be solved. So I just want to express my appreciation for the work that you and staff have done to get some control back in this area, to where the costs now they're still significant. This is one of the places the city spends a very large amount of money. It's probably after public safety and our public works, this may be the largest general area in terms of expenditure. So it's something we spend a lot of money on, and it's good that we've gotten some control over it, because it's one of those things that if it doesn't get in control, then it can risk the whole area in terms of its long-term sustainability. So thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, staff, for all the work you put into this again. Any questions, comments on aquatics? Okay, next slide, please. Sports revenues are up some from 125 to 127. As you'll see, basketball was down some from 65 to 62. There are some ups and some downs there. One noticeable change there was Little League field. We didn't used to charge for the use of that. We did put an agreement in place last year, you may remember, between the city and Little League. So that makes a little bit of money. Also, again, the activity fees. So same thing, we divided up those revenues where they should be in sports, got some of that as well at $4,800. So your your sports revenues are up from 125 to 127 for next year. Next slide, please. Sports expenditures are down from 236 to 230. The $5,600, roughly a 2.3% decrease. Sports is a good one too. Sports is actually the 55% recovery. So great job, guys. I know they're looking to add some summer programs to that, trying to get some summer programs going if the school will let us. So we are working on that. A few changes, you see this when there are multiple small changes. For example, adult sports was cut some, soccer was cut some, but again, no real big changes. Questions as far as sports budget goes? Next slide, please. Recreation services summary. Total revenues 432. Total expenditures 810,000 for a cost recovery of 53%. And again, we're very proud of that number. It took a lot of work to get there. So thank you again for staff, everything you did to get us there. Next slide, please. Moving on into special events. Our special events, they do a great job with these. As you know, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of work. If you go out there, they may seem easy, but for any of you that have ever worked city events, a lot of work goes into them to make it flow as smoothly as they do. It really does. So a lot of background work on those. For this year, budgeted at $290. Next year, it's budgeted at $312,000. That is a 7% increase. Again, $312,000. One big change there is the Spring Art Festival is up $15,000. Another one is Christmas in the Park will be a 2-day event as it was this year. That worked well. Fall Arts is up some. Native American is actually down from 55 to 43. And the movie event, we'll be looking to add a movie event. You know, we did one before during COVID. That's $4,200. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side of special events, actually down some from 347 to 345, or a $1,400 decrease. The special events department actually has a cost recovery of 90%. So that's great work. It takes a lot of work to get there. It takes a lot of money to put on big events when you have events of 10 to 15,000 people. So, and also that does include public works overtime. And if you've been at the events, you see public works out there. So that comes out of special events. And the reason why is so we can put a true cost on what our special events cost. You have to know what public works versus charging it to public works budget, if that makes sense.
Matthew, it's Ron.
Yes, sir.
I have a question on this slide. We have movie event, $4,200. We also had on the last slide, is that a duplication or is that an actual double cost?
No, sir. On this one, now I think if Trisha's on the line, so we're looking to get sponsors for our movie event. So on the last one, you'll see it as a revenue because we're looking to get $4,200 in revenue, and on this side is the expenditure. So if we bring the money in as a sponsor, we have to have a way to spend it. So it's basically a wash. It comes in as
It's
a
a
revenue.
neutral.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sorry.
Not at all. Thank you, sir. Other questions on special events?
I want to note for the council, if you go back into these special events budgets and expenditures, along with the rec center budgets and expenditures, if you go back 10 years, 12 years, and really dive into the budgets, what you find is that many of the indirect costs of managing these areas was generally buried in the city's budget and other departments. So the cost recoveries were not really as accurate as they are today. Staff has gotten to the point where we really are accounting for the actual cost of the special events and the actual costs of all of our rec services. So not only are the recoveries better generally and they're much healthier, but also we're recognizing the expenses where they actually are occurring, which means that the numbers are something that we can really rely on. So I want to thank staff for the work that has been done to get this area, much more tightly managed. It's a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, staff. Other questions, comments on special events? Next slide, please, Paige. Community services, this one's pretty simple. It's city line, the advertising city line, up from 6,500 to $9,000. Again, $9,000 in revenue. Next slide, please. Community services expenditures are down from 106 to 77. Again, a big change there again is the elimination of the rec office manager position. That took the wages down from 39 to 25, $14,000 decrease. Some things we did move were from other departments. For example, public works are benches and plaques for parks. That belongs in community services more than public works, so we moved that. That was $5,000. Appropriations stayed the same at $20,000. Various things, support efforts, city line. City line cost is down. Some of you may remember we did a RFP for that last year from $12,000 to $10,800. And also the Civic Plus was moved to IT. One thing I would be interested in council's thoughts on is Channel 11. So we've cut it down from $4,200 to $2,500. So I think it depends how you look on Channel 11. In my opinion, cable is dying. It just is. More and more people are using Hulu, Netflix, however you want to say, lessons people have cable TV. That being said, we do probably have some citizens that still utilize this. I'd be interested to see what your guys' thoughts are on that. If that's something you want to continue with, you think it still makes sense to have it. We also stream, this is mostly used for State of the City. We stream State of the City also through YouTube. I think it would get more use that way, but again, that's just my opinion. Welcome to your comments, questions on that. Thank you. Paige, if you'll make a note for community appropriations. Terry just made a good point that we're planning for 17.5 for this year. So I don't know if that should be 17.5, not 20, but if you'll just make a note for us to look at that. Thank you, Terry.
Sure.
Next slide, please. And with that being said, you guys have listened to me talk enough tonight. I'm going to turn it back over to Paige. Thank you, Mayor Council.
Thank you, Matthew. This is just to recap our net operating result. So this is the revenues, 10.3. I already went over those in detail earlier. But then this slide summarizes all the department expenses that we just went over. So our total operating budget that we're initially proposing is $9,457,407. So that would give us an operating surplus of $861,872. So I want to point out that it does include the significant public safety increase here. But the debt service, it only includes our current debt service. It doesn't include anything for the city center because we're going to have a study session about that on May 12th. And so we'll have more information on that later. But if you look back in history at our actuals, if you look at FY18, our actual operating surplus was 1.7, 2.1, 2.6. The fiscal year 21 budget, we budgeted to have only $1 million surplus, but we're going to end up with 3.1. So this is a little bit lower than this current year's budget, but still really well considering we had nearly almost $1 million increase, mostly for the public safety. Are there any questions on the net and just ongoing revenues and ongoing expenses? At the next study session, we'll go over our one-time revenues and one-time expenses.
I just want to confirm and I guess make sure that everybody realizes that the ongoing revenues do not include any construction sales tax. Correct?
Correct.
So
that's correct.
Construction sales tax actually will add to the surplus that we have available for one-time expenses like our CIP program. So this is a very healthy, it's a very healthy budget in terms of our ability to fund these CIP programs.
Okay, if there's no other questions.
I just one other question. Have you calculated what our expenditure limit is for next year?
It's still a preliminary number, but it's approximately 22 million. We're typically $11 million under our expenditure limit.
So it's as high as 22. Yeah, that's higher than I thought it was.
That I pulled it off the state's website the other day, and it's a rough number off the top of my head, but it was about 22.3. I'll have that ready for us at the next study session, the exact number.
We want to make sure that we include in our expenditures anything that we're going to need to have covered for the infrastructure that we're looking at building in the city center, to make sure that we don't end up with not enough budget capacity, particularly if the expenditure limit is 22 million. We have a lot of room there to get that project in and not have any expenditure questions.
Paige, if I might, can I get a hard copy of this, please?
It actually is in your, if you look at your council packet, that went out. I just know this because I have it open on my other computer. All of these slides are in that packet.
Oh, that's fine. Okay.
We did make a couple changes this afternoon, so I will send the updated one. It was just to public safety. I had inadvertently left out the cameras, the $80,000 for the cameras.
Okay, so we'll have it sent out again then. So you'll get a new one, Councilman Romack. Don't print off the old one.
And Councilman Romack, if you like, we'd be glad to have Jenna print off a copy and have it for you at City Hall, sir.
As long as it's on the computer, I'm fine. I can print my own. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you. You all right? You didn't fall over, did you, Matthew?
No, sir, my phone did. Thank you, though.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of this night's agenda. Thanks again to all the council members and staff for being here on a Thursday night, spending some quality time with everybody. Obviously, a very important topic that I think this year, the process this year has worked very efficiently as compared to some of the amount of hours that we as a council put into this document over the last several years. So Matthew, thank you for your organization of this very important topic. And hopefully the council has all the information that it needs to feel comfortable that the city is spending the citizens' money in ways that is effective and efficient. So thank you. And with that,
Mayor,
is there a motion to adjourn?
1 second, sir.
Oh, did I get ahead of myself?
Just a little bit. That's okay. Paige, you go to the slide with the dates.
Yeah, just real quick. At the next study session, we'll go over the city center financing, the 5-year capital plan, our 5-year financial forecast. We'll have a complete budget citywide at the next meeting. And then on June 16th, we'll adopt the tentative, set our maximum expenditures that date. And then on July 21st, we'll have our public hearing and final adoption of all the budget. And that's it.
Okay. If there are no questions, is there a motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
Is there a second? Moved by Councilman Romack, seconded by Councilman Clare. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Enjoy the
Great.
rest.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening.
Good job, Paige.
Thank you.
Paige, great job.
Thank you.